two forthcoming events. And now I want to introduce my friend and our guest speaker, Satyadasa, who's going to be giving a talk at Sangha Night this evening. Satyadasa is the author of the book, this very excellent book that's just been published, At the Sound of One Hand. And I'll say a bit about him and a bit about the book as well. And we'll have copies of the book that you can buy this evening, and he's willing to sign them as well. Yeah, so maybe I'll just read out the blurb from the book first, by way of introduction to the book in Satyadasa. It says, for Satyadasa, the Buddhist path has been fulfilling and often joyous, but also full of doubts and obstacles. What does it mean to be a Buddhist in the West in the 21st century? And is being born with one hand a curse or a blessing? So this is Satyadasa's memoir, growing up as himself. And the first few chapters I found really moving and poignant. I loved reading the book. And then at times really, really laugh out loud funny as well, and witty, and really, really relatable. I describe it as like a comparison to the Triratna story, where we've got like a formal account of Triratna and it's grown up. And this is a kind of personal, very, very relatable, accessible account of what is it like to be a Buddhist. And at times hilarious account of what's it like to be a Buddhist. And it's a book that I didn't want to finish because I didn't want to get to the end of it because I was enjoying it so much. And because I really like Satyadasa, but a really objective review was from Dave Homer, who's come tonight specifically, just finished the book today and said it was excellent, so he wanted to come to Sangha Night. So that was someone who's not already as fond of Satyadasa as I am. And Satyadasa and I were ordained together in 2011, so that's when I first really got to know Satyadasa, when he became Satyadasa, and we got to know each other then. And so Maitridasa and I and Satyadasa were all on that same course together. And just became very, very fond of him, particularly during the second part of the course. It was like second 2 months of the course. We just hung out a lot together and had a lot of fun. He's just a really fun, playful guy, very super intelligent, super sharp mind, but very, very witty and funny and playful as well. And he communicates the Dharma in that way. His book is written in that way. And you'll get a flavour of that this evening with his talk. So he's super intelligent. He's a lawyer. And he has a business writing will. Satyadasa has written my will. He's written Satyajyoti's will, I believe, other people in the Sangha as well. So if you want a will written, he's your man. Get in touch with him. There's all kinds of things like probate, that kind of stuff. He's also the Buddhist tutor at Eton, which is amazing. So there's maybe our future Prime Minister might be a Buddhist. Our future leaders. So Satyadasa is the Buddhist tutor at Eton. He teaches at the London Buddhist Centre, and this evening they're going to be giving our Sangha Night talk. And there's lots more I could say, but I want to give him time to talk as well. So let's give a warm welcome to Satyadasa.
Thank you very much, Bodhinaga. People often say that about, he's a Buddhist tutor at Eton. It'd be great if there was a Buddhist Prime Minister. If anything's going to bring down the esteem of Buddhism in this country, it'd be if one of them becomes Prime Minister. So here we go. Yeah, it's fantastic to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. Really overjoyed to be here. I have lived in Sheffield twice in my life for brief, very happy periods, but for 6-9 months twice. Once in 1997 and once in 2003, both of which I just have these beautiful memories. It's like idyllic happiness. It's not all my life isn't coloured in that way, but I had these 2 periods, and I remember. So I was living in Nether Edge, and I'd cycle. I just started to come to just started to go on retreats and things, and I'd drive up, cycle up Broom Hill to what was then the Buddhist Centre. And I just wanted to reflect on that just to begin with, because that was in the back of a hairdresser's shop somewhere in Broom Hill, and it was wonderful. Moga Vamsa was there, who's at the back, and Archara before he was Archara, and Susiddhi, and somebody called Kalyana, a woman, I can't remember her name, but there was these people who were holding this culture. What I'm going to be talking about this evening is culture, actually, in various ways. But they were holding that culture in the back of a hairdresser's shop. And one of the highlights of my week was going there, and it was the meditation. The meditation was really good. But before the meditation, we were chanting the Tiratna Vandana. And the magic that I felt in that hairdresser's shop, humble hairdresser's shop, just chanting together in Pali, that was before I knew what any of the words meant. It was something about that, and something about the mystery of what was being communicated in this very humble setting. And sometimes, and I mentioned this in my book, that you would hear the Sheffield Wednesday would score during the Tiratna Vandana. That was a peak experience, because you'd hear this roar coming up from below. It is Wednesday, isn't it? It's not United. I haven't made a mistake. I don't know. But basically, there would be a roar, and sometimes there were things would coincide. And you know, anyway, so I'm going to come back to that image at some point, maybe. So we're talking. This series is about. Hello, everybody on Zoom as well. Hello, hello. So we're talking. This series is about the wheel of life. And an image of that should be appearing soon. And the wheel of life is it's a way of reflecting. It's a tool. There's so much in it. It's a rich tool for reflecting on both our lives as we find life, and in a more aspirational sense. So it's in a way, to give it an overview. It's a vision of what they call conditioned existence, but it also contains within it the seeds of how to grow, how to evolve within this life that we find. And one way of putting that is the conditioned in pursuit of the unconditioned. That's a very grand way of talking about the whole spiritual path, is that we are creatures who are all the time, things are arising in dependence upon conditions. This great vision of this happening in so many levels of an unfathomable complexity. And the Buddha, this wheel of life shows how our actions, particularly our skillful actions and our unskillful actions, can cause us to fall out into various patterns, various states of being. And it also shows these Buddha figures that you can see prominently in each realm. And there are various pointers to something that is taking us beyond that conditioned realm. So you've already had a couple of talks in the last two sessions. We're going to talk about the animal realm this evening. I was joking that I've just been to a safari park. So I've got a 4-year-old son. I've been to 2 safari parks in the last month doing some research for this talk. So I can tell you quite a lot about howler monkeys and the black eastern rhinoceros, but that's not in the talk, so don't worry. So you've looked at the hell realm and the hungry ghost realm, and this evening it's the animal realm, and these are collectively known as the 3 lower realms. And one way of talking about the hell realm is that it's just sort of in a brief recapitulation, really, is that it's an objectification of a world which is, or a mind, that is dominated by hatred or paranoia. It's that state of mind which has become stuck, if you like, in a world where one feels constantly under threat and where people are seen as a threat. So when there's always some trouble that you're getting into, and we can talk about whether these realms are objective or merely psychological. That's one sort of debate. But in a kind of felt sense, the felt sense of a hell realm, or any of the hungry ghost realm, and indeed the lower realm, the actual sense of it is that you're completely stuck in it. There is no easy way out of it. It has the characteristic, if you like, of being eternal. As I talk about hell, as you can't get out of hell. But the quality that's being alluded to there is that there's no easy way out. And that is surely part of suffering. If we're in a state of suffering and we know it's going to be over by, like if this talk went on forever, you'd be enjoying it a lot less right now. But it's going to end. Okay? So, I did an example of this sort of thing, and it gets us into this idea of realms. is, and there's quite a few people who are, and it also includes, so I'll just say the hungry ghost realm, which you, I believe, looked at last week, is the objectification not of hatred, which is one of the root poisons in the center of the will, but of craving, or the sense of inner lack, sense of nothing ever really, nothing ever being enjoyable, actually. That there being a constant need to look outside yourself to pull something in, but it never really works. That's the hell of that realm, is the hell of unsatisfied craving. You just cannot get satisfaction in that realm. Couple of Christmases ago, my mother had died the year before, and we didn't want to do a family Christmas, so my wife and I decided to help at shelter. And we went to shelter, and I saw quite a few of the people who actually live. I live in Bethnal Green in East London. I live on an alley, and there's quite a few folk who drift up and down the alley a lot. And you can hear them because we live right next to the alley, and you can hear that they're always in a state of very often having a massive argument about something, and they're always sort of getting into minor conflicts, even amongst themselves or with other people. And they seem like they're stuck in that realm. And then we go to this, and they turned up at this shelter, Christmas thing, where just for 2 days, these people are all welcomed in, fed, given proper clothes, entertainment, and they're met by people. And I was really struck by just one thing that happened there. There was a man, I don't think he was actually homeless, but he could come along anyway, but you don't have to be homeless actually to go there, but he was getting a haircut. And it was a very powerful experience for everybody, because he was getting a proper haircut from a hairdresser who turned up to give their skills, and she was cutting his hair, giving him a head massage, and over the course of that haircut, you could see his humanity coming back. And of course, that was a perception. Of course, he was a human before he got the haircut, but it was like everybody, like there was only a few of us in the room, a few of the other hairdressers, but you could see the effect of just having a haircut. And that was the most tragic thing that I saw, in a way, because I realized it was just for a moment that he was entering a different kind of realm where people were going to relate to him a bit differently. He was actually tasting what it was like to be in human community, and then he was going to have to go back into whatever he was into before, because it's very hard to get out of these kind of states when they're really dug in. And I think that's what, we can talk about hells and hungry ghosts realms as being objective places, and I don't know about that, and I'm sure there's plenty of hell and there's plenty of hungry ghosts right here on earth, much more extreme than the one I've described as well. So that's a bit about those. So tonight we're going to look at the animal realm, which is the objectification of the third poison, really, which is ignorance. Okay, so the three lower realms are really where you've got stuck in greed, hatred, and ignorance. The animal realm symbolizes in a way, the animal realm is a bit more obviously a realm because it's the realm of animals. But on our level, it's not a realm. So it's where it's a kind of a willful, or it's a lack of any search for or engagement with or interest in any kind of search for meaning, for value in life that is other than the kinds of satisfactions that an animal and we all naturally have to find within our lives. So satisfying our physical needs, our what they call, the requisites, don't they, within the monastic tradition? They're really food, shelter, a bit of medicine to keep you going, that kind of thing. So we need, there's various things that we need. The animal realm symbolizes where there isn't any other higher aspect to one's searching than that. It's just to do with, physical needs, you could say. There's Gampopa. He talks about laziness. Gampopa is a sort of a Tibetan of many centuries ago. Famously spoke about laziness as being where you are a very busy person. You're engaging. I've said this. I was trained as a lawyer, and I worked in a very busy city practice, and occasionally I would sort of wheel out Gampopa, saying, this is all laziness masquerading as some kind of virtuous activity here, because all of this whole structure is really just not. It's about business, isn't it? In that case, about money and things like that. But it doesn't have any higher pointing. It's a whole elaborate culture, the law office that I was in, that didn't have any higher pointing. People feel very. I don't really mean to knock them, actually, but we're all like this, aren't we? We can be very busy, but that doesn't mean that we're not lazy in this scheme. But Tsongkhapa, I read, went further than that and said that what laziness is where you really take delight in not having any spiritual aims, where you really just relish being involved in all the things that we do. I mean, I think you could say that you could be in the animal realm and come to the Buddhist Centre. This isn't something that is just about what other people do. None of these realms are really reflective if they're merely just ways of describing states of mind that other people get into, or states of being. In the human realm, we're able to partake of all of these different realms. That the characteristic of the human realm is that it isn't one of the other realms, but it contains aspects of, so we can relate to beings being stuck in states of suffering. And we can relate to unsatisfied craving. We can certainly relate to that in terms of how society is all the time modeling for us the ideal of having big experiences delivered through material goods that don't really deliver that. But so the animal realm, it could be, you come to the Buddhist Centre, and it's not necessarily that we here are not, a lot of the time, not pursuing our basic needs. There's nothing actually wrong with pursuing your basic needs. It's just that there is nothing else that's entered in. Of course, you're going to find that hard to maintain if you keep coming to the Buddhist Centre. That attitude will be challenged. So I want to talk about three things, and then I gather we're going to go into groups. I was at a talk only a couple of, maybe even a week ago, by Ian McGilchrist at the London Buddhist Centre, who's written a fantastic book called The Master and His Emissary, and recently released a much more massive book, which I haven't read yet, called The Matter with Things. And he said something interesting at the end, and he's a very studied man, he's a professor. He's annotated his books. I mean, they're very big, but they're very well studied. And he said that there's three things that really could help our world and help us. And they all relate to culture. And he said one is contact with nature. The second one is being involved in a community which has some higher spiritual orientation. And the third one is having a disposition towards what he called the divine. So I want to explore, what would a helpful culture look like? So why am I talking about culture? I should say that. In the realms, the Buddha appears, making various offerings, and in the animal realm, what the Buddha offers is a book. So he's not offering, taking that literally, a book to an animal wouldn't do much good with it. It's a metaphor. So he's offering culture. And you could probably read that in terms of culture in its broadest sense, learning, book learning, but more widely than that, culture, the way that cultures can uphold and disseminate and value, and also Dharma culture. So all of that could be indicated by this book, because this is what. So what I want to look at is, what would a helpful culture look like? What would a helpful culture look like at this time? And I'm going to use those headings. So I think the first thing is that a helpful culture would be one that cherishes contact with nature. My son is just adopted a little boy, and we took him to nursery, so we took him to see the local nursery. And I must say, nurseries have come on a lot since I was. They are absolutely brilliant. And it was a part of the whole school. And we went into the ground floor, which was the nursery, and there's not only is there lots of actual animals there, there's all kinds of foliage, there's beautiful art everywhere. Every single space that you look at is full of natural, lovely objects. All the walls, even I don't know about the ceiling, I didn't even look up, I didn't even need to. It was a beautiful, sensory, engaged, and you could get dirt. I live in East London, and every spare patch of ground is a forest school now. We don't actually have any forest, but you just need a tiny patch. You can call it a forest school. But, bugs and worms and things. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So we then got a tour through the rest of the school. And as you gradually got up to sort of 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, the sort of foliage went down. There was still some art on the walls. About 8 years old, 9 years old, it's getting a little bit thinner. Things are coming it's a bit more textbooky everywhere you look. Still very nice. But then we got to the last room, which was the computer room. In the computer room, there was nothing apart from computers. There was no decoration. It was like, that was where the whole thing was heading, towards being in a room where you can look at computers. And like the whole rest of your sensory existence sort of has vanished. I don't know why you can't decorate a computer room, but it never seems to happen, does it? And in a way, you could say that's where that's a lot. There's something about, in Sheffield, probably you just running up MAM tour every weekend, aren't you, everyone here? So it's all totally different. This doesn't even make any sense to you. You're thinking, what's this city guy talking about? But, so cherishes contact with nature. So, yeah, what about that? What about contact with nature? How do we do that in our Sangha? Of course, one of the things that we do is we go on retreat. Yeah, we go on retreat. So wilderness, wildness, is not just it's something that's beyond utility, isn't it? So we have to have a culture. We need to find a culture that cherishes that aspect. You have beautiful gardens here. It's really amazing to see what you've done around the building here. But why is wilderness so fascinating, so interesting? So we go on a solitary retreat, and one of the things that I've always experienced on solitary retreats is doubt. And certainly when I used to go on solitary retreats, I used to experience a lot of doubt. Some fear, not much fear. I used to wish that I could experience fear. People used to come back from solitary retreats saying I experienced great fear and it was so amazing. They faced their fear. I didn't. I just found my own bored little mind wittering on about various things, along with an experience of what the hell am I doing in this ridiculous hut when I could be on a proper holiday. That was a real thing. And I was there for 2 weeks and I got to put up with this character going on for 2 weeks. But when we go on retreats and we have a bit more contact with nature, particularly on a solitary retreat, nature it's got nothing to do with our conventional life. It's got nothing to do with all the ways in which we pedal through life, thinking about this is important, I've got to do this, I'm this kind of person, I live in, these are the things that I value, these are my goals and ambitions and ideas. And you go into nature, and nature's got nothing to do with that, and it takes away a lot of the ground of your ordinary carry on, and that's true of any retreat, but it's particularly true on a solitary retreat. And I particularly felt that it puts you right back into contact with, well, what is there apart from all my ideas and opinions, which I can go through, and if I'm solitary retreat, I haven't even got anyone to share them with. All those conventions that we live by, they drop away. Sorry, I shouldn't touch this. So I would experience doubt, and as a culture, what I would see us as doing in a Buddhist community is we are trying to allow people who live in city lives some consistent contact with a real place like a retreat centre that is in the countryside, not necessarily in the wilderness. But more than that, we're also trying to encourage a sense of connection to that which lies below all of our kind of materialistic culture, lies below all of our sophisticated world of human endeavor, all the kind of layers of humans creating a world for humans, for the betterment of humans, and making us happy and miserable and whatever, and all the big debates and everything, and all of that can it certainly drives me completely crazy, trying to even understand what's going on in our culture, particularly at the moment. You go to nature, and it challenges all of that. It doesn't have anything to do with any of that. It's beyond, and you start to realize this sort of this society that we're in is in a way. Well, what is it? What is the society that we're in? Is it trying to lift off from nature and have nothing to do with nature and disconnect us further from having to be, made ill by nature or inconvenienced by nature, or nature becomes a big threat, which obviously it is a threat. But it can become, we can lose a sense that the primary reference in all cultures have had to have some kind of negotiation or relationship to this thing called nature. I'm not going to go in about what nature is exactly. It's a bit of a mystery. But I think in our society, certainly my experience is that we have quite a sense of alienation and disconnection from nature. Maybe this is a subject for discussion. Do you have that sense? One of my early memories of death was my grandfather dying, and I was 18, and I saw his body after he'd died. He had it brought back to the house, and he was a very learned man, and his body was there sitting on his desk amongst all his philosophy tracts and all his poetry and all this great learning that he'd done over his life. And I had this sense of, what is the point? What is the point of all of the things that he's built up in his life, all this intricate learning that he did? Because now he's dead, that's it, it's done. There's nothing else to it. And I do remember feeling quite horrified by the image of death. Of course, death is part of nature, but my view of death was highly conditioned by my cultural outlook. So there he was. He was a dead body. I didn't attribute anything greater than his body was what he was, and now that his body was manifestly decomposing, that was the end of it. So there, I'm just trying to indicate that there is a way that I was holding, or a way that I was understanding everything, myself, nature, the world, that was conditioning how I viewed death. I remember my grandfather buying burial plots at one point and telling the whole family that he'd bought these burial plots and there was room for all of us in this plot. And I was just horrified by this idea of going down into the ground, and the image of that haunted me quite a lot, and because that was this unimaginable end. Now, what I'm getting at here is that, there's a view there about what life is and what is really going on. So that's surely going to affect the way that we then perceive what the world is and what nature is. So how do we account for this sense of disconnection? How do we account for this sense of not participating in nature? I don't know whether you can relate to this, that we have a built-up sense of self that's somehow been very cut off probably over a very long period of time. And there's probably people who can speak about this much more fluently than me, about how materialistic science has gradually reduced us to matter, and how as the story of the universe in a way has become more vast, incorporating all the kind of scientific understandings, and yet at the same time we find ourselves in a very narrow place, a very narrow materialistic space. I don't know whether you can see what I'm getting at there. I don't even quite know what I'm getting at, but it's like, are we, what is the cause of this disconnection that we feel from nature? And I think a culture today that would be really useful for people would be one that was trying to build back a sense of participation, firstly and obviously in the natural cycles of life, in the connection to food, the connection to a real place, not just a sort of abstract idea of nature or anything, connections to actual places and involvement in nature in an obvious sense. But more deeply would build back a connection to, well, even you could say, to put it sort of more grandly, nature as a mystery, nature as even a divine presence, nature as something which is utterly ineffable. And we know that, don't we? We know that through listening to, David Attenborough, just walking in your garden, that nature is totally mysterious. It's presenting itself to us when we meditate, when we certainly, for me, the path of meditation has really opened up that sense of, I don't really know what all this is. Clearly, this is not just, this stuff out there. Nature is not just stuff out there. It is me perceiving it, but there is something that is being perceived. And, the mysteriousness of nature, the divinity of nature, all these are ways that people have pointed at nature throughout past times. Having a much more alive and sense of nature. This is such an important part of any culture, and I think this is the first thing, anyway, that the Buddha might be offering, or that I'm suggesting from Ian McGilchrist. It's an obvious thing. The second thing is Sangha, or community. So these are offerings to help us cherish and value spiritual aspirations, because the opposite of that is to be living merely for the quite understandable fulfillment of our basic needs for food, shelter, sex, and all the kind of sophisticated ways we can try to fulfill those needs. So we need a culture that helps us to reconnect to nature in both obvious ways and ways that open up a sense of the mystery of nature and the wonder of nature, and that allow us to feel that we're really participating in that, and that this goes beyond a very narrow sense of materialism, and even maybe beyond a sense of my life and my death. Okay, but then culture. We need a culture that cherishes communities that uphold spiritual values. When I first came to I first visited the London Buddhist Centre, and then I went on a 10-day retreat in 1997, and that's often how people get much more deeply involved in communities. And it was at a school in Oxfordshire that we'd hired. And I didn't experience myself as searching for anything at that stage in my life. I experienced myself as being dissatisfied with my life. I was 22, and I had got a law degree, and I didn't want to be a lawyer. I thought everything was pretty rubbish. I thought, I looked at, with that clarity you have sometimes when you're young, I just looked at all the kinds of jobs that people do, and I gamed them out right to the end, and I thought, you're still going to die, it's rubbish. You know, and that was a lack of my own lack of confidence was there as well. It wasn't just that I was, you know, I had that sense of, oh, I can't do all this, I can't, you know, I wasn't very good. And then part of it may have had to do with my disability, and you know, I later in life had to sort of look at how that was affecting me around then as well. I had been on another retreat with Vipassana Trust before that, and I had learned to meditate, and I had learned this amazing facility. This you know, you go on these Vipassana retreats, and I don't know if anyone's done one, but it's sort of 10 days, complete silence. You're sitting still, hour-long patches for probably about 11 one-hour meditations a day, 10 or 11. Starting at 4 a.m. and you don't look at anybody else. You just keep your eyes down. You of course, you sneakily start to make impressions of people from the way, you know, their socks are or something. Or you definitely still form impressions of people. Can really annoy you even if you don't look at them. And but that was it. It was a very disciplined. It was very sort of. There's part of the, and when I finished doing that, there wasn't a Sangha. There wasn't not much of a Sangha that I could find that was part of that community. So I didn't carry on that practice. They were really based around retreats. And I think that I'm not going to say this is what applies to the Vipassana Trust, because I really don't know too much about it as an organization. But there can be a tendency, I think, within us that just wants this spiritual matter to be an individual thing, so that it's to do with my understanding and my development, and I will fire up on the Dharma, and I'll keep going, and I'll eventually have a kind of a breakthrough. But what really changed for me was coming into contact with a Sangha, and particularly, you know, the culture of this Sangha is really friendship. It's really and I've had that confirmed again and again over all my time in Sri Ratna. This is a very special thing, a very special part of our culture. Of course, it's there in other cultures, and we don't need to sort of go on about it and too much and, you know, make the difference too strong. But it was this. I think it was this kind of spiritual loneliness that was appeased when I came into a Sangha. And I never thought of myself as lonely, because that's a very, very unfashionable thing to think of yourself as. But there was something there that I had never known existed before that point. I'd read a lot of philosophy. I'd even been on a retreat. I'd read books on Zen Buddhism. I thought I knew quite a lot about all of that kind of stuff. But it was just going to this humble makeshift shrine in a girls' dormitory. The girls weren't there. In Oxfordshire. I think it was in their theatre, actually. That there was a vision of people living, you know, because you started to hear about how some of these people live together, and a lot of people seem to be very good friends with each other and have known each other for a long time, and they had you know, all the kind of ways of relating to each other, all related to a sense of the meaning of why things were done. It didn't allow superficiality. The culture seemed to point to depth everywhere, not just the teachings, yes, the meditation practices, the pujas, but not just that, even the way that meals were shared, like you've been doing this evening. You know, everything about the way that you are as a culture here at the Sheffield Buddhist Centre. It's kind of stopping and saying, what is this really about? And it's kind of been, you know, it's not perfect. We don't have a perfect culture. That's a, you know, red herring. You can't have a perfect culture. But I think the key with culture, if I, you know, in my experience, is that we have to both love it and kind of see beyond it. Love it and see through it. Why are we doing things like this? What is this really pointing to? I mean, this is a sort of a question in a way about learning to relate to culture. How can we learn to relate to our cultures as ways of going deeper into this whole endeavor, which is the Dharma. And it's easy to think with cultures that, oh, why do we have to fuss about cultures? Why do we have to get in? Because cultures and sanghas are, they're complex things, and they're highly unsatisfactory, actually. They don't really work, ultimately speaking. They change, people leave, other people come along. But I mean, it's fantastic for me that the culture of the community has allowed me to be friends with people over decades. It allowed me to see people grow old and die, even. It's allowed me to feel this friendship with people that naturally kind of appeases something in my being, so that I'm not so much chasing after, like I do chase after things in the animal realm. Let's just be clear about that. I've got two flats, and I've got a third one that I'd like as well. But so I do own things. I do chase after things, and that's just obvious. It shouldn't even need to be said. But the culture that we have, say, around a Buddhist center and a Buddhist community in the broadest sense, not just the center, but all the people, and we have businesses, and then the retreat centers, and the people who live in outlying sort of wilderness areas, still some people like that. The whole culture of Triratna, and within the whole culture of the Buddhist culture, this really holds up a means. It holds up a way. It holds up an opportunity, and it's very precious. It's a great task to kind of try to hold together the conditions of a spiritual culture that, and once that's established, it naturally tends to create a sense of coming out of the animal realm, coming out of the hell realm, coming out of the hungry ghost realm. It gives us a certain amount of, it gives quite a lot of joy to people. I've seen this again and again. There's joy, there's a simple joy of meditation. Meditation too is, you could say, contact with nature, with your nature, your breath and your body. It's just nature. You just get a simple enjoyment out of that, and then you do it together. So I was there on this retreat in the countryside, and I was with others, and there's something that is quite different when you're meditating with others. There's another whole field of connection that starts to open up. And so there's a challenge for us in communities. Firstly, in communities and culture, this culture that you're building here, or in a more general sense, learning to relate to it as a means, learning to love it, but not to treat it in a superficial way, to see that it has a pointing. Of course, one of the fears that comes up very often when you're getting involved in a spiritual culture or a community that has a spiritual ideal is that you're going to be submerged, and that your individual identity is going to be sort of wiped out. And it is a struggle, because that I was speaking to someone at dinner, actually, and she was making this point that, in a way, there's a struggle to be your own person in the community and to cooperate with others. Struggle to start to get to know yourself. And that's what it's given me over the years, I find. It's just allowed me to I'll come on to that. So I think that the real this culture that we have here, what we would call Sangha, Sangha is the jewel that's represented here. It's a jewel that is born in a way out of our collective endeavor together. It's a quicksilver thing, Sangha. It's not the building, it's not the walls, it's not any one person. It's this beautiful jewel, you could say. It's this spirit of communication and friendship which is there, and that has this deeper pointing. So a culture that cherishes nature, and a culture that cherishes communities that uphold spiritual values. These are massive contributions to the world. Of course, Triratna is not the only one making these kinds of contributions, but that's an endeavor that we've been doing for decades now. And the third thing that was in this talk was saying that we need a culture which has a disposition towards the divine. I remember, how am I doing for time? I didn't clock the beginning of this.
It's quite late.
Okay, it's quite late. Okay, we need a disposition towards the divine. I'll say this really quickly. Well, probably not. It's difficult to say things quickly. Just enjoy it. Whew. Okay. I had friends, when I was first getting involved, I used to have these friends visit the community, non-Buddhist friends, and I used to cringe with embarrassment. I lived in a men's community above the London Buddhist Centre, and I would say, "Hi, how you doing? Come in." And I would march them past a series of Buddhas in the hallway and in where we ate and everywhere, and all this religious paraphernalia that I was very ill at ease with when I first got involved in Buddhism. And I would do pujas, and my toes would sort of curl while I was doing pujas. I think, oh God, this is so awful. Why? What? And yet, at the same time as me feeling this, there I was doing this puja. There I was evoking this incredible ideal, the Bodhisattva ideal, which is what the pujas evoke. And I thought, oh, I've got to stop curling my toes and finding this excruciating, and try to love it like all these other people seem to have great faith in Tara or the Buddha or some other figure that was on the shrine. And they'd be some of them would be making florid offerings and things like this. And I didn't feel like me. So I had to sit for many years in a way, neither betwixt or between those two sorts of responses. That on the one hand, I always felt different after a puja. I did feel like it had touched something in me. It had touched something in me that meditation didn't touch in me. It touched even in a very humdrum sort of puja. And here we're talking about this magic thing, which is the arising of a kind of faith. And I'm going to call that the disposition towards the divine that we call Shraddha here. The whole of the wheel is this movement. So we all experience dukkha. There is dukkha in this conditioned existence. There is suffering, there is dissatisfaction. It never settles down. It doesn't provide lasting fulfillment. Even if you behave in a very skillful and wonderfully beneficent way, you can still end up in a right terrible condition in conditioned existence, because not everything is to do with your actions. There's a whole universe of things going on, and it's dangerous in a way. But it's unsatisfactory. That was what the Buddha said. I won't go into that. But there's this movement where from dukkha, as we start to leave the path, leave the wheel, we start to have this intuition that we call Shraddha, this faith that there is something beyond. And going back to Sheffield Wednesday, for me, that chant that was coming up from Sheffield Wednesday somehow chimed in with my feelings for the T-Ratna Vandana. And it was like this, if I really listen underneath the puja, if I really listen to the spirit of what's being communicated here, that's being inflected through the words, through this thing, but through also the people I'm with, I'm really listening to it. It's like a deep underground sort of roar, like if Sheffield Wednesday score. There's something there, and that Shraddha is what's really at the heart of a spiritual community, this spiritual community, that sense of faith, sense of something that will take us beyond nihilism, something that will take us beyond the sort of pessimism of the materialistic, narrow, backed off, just looking at the world, analyzing it, trying to sort it out, even with politics or science or whatever it is. All of those alienating modes, there's something deeper than that really connects us. And if we can really find that within us, that's major. That really is what I've been referring to in a couple of talks recently I was giving as the thread. That is the thread that we're after. There's a lovely poem by William Stafford called The Way It Is, when he says, there is a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. You could say that it goes among the conditioned. It's the unconditioned going through the conditioned. There's a thread you follow that goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. You try to tell people about the thread, but you can't really sum it up. You can't pin down this Dharma. You can't really know it. And that's the beautiful thing about Dharma practice, is it certainly landed me in a place where I don't really know. I don't really know. But I know for sure that I am not a nihilist anymore. I know that I started off as a culturally not thought through, when you die, that's it. Oh, crap. I don't want to think about that. It's just absolutely hideously awful. Some people think it's really good, actually, that, there's nothing after death, because that's the end of that. You can back up. Some people don't have that negative response to that, but I certainly did. And chiseling away at the nihilism, the pessimism that comes along with that, and the narrowness and the constricted views, it's a massive task, culturally speaking. I mean, we're just chipping away at it in a tiny little way within our communities and within Sri Ratna. We haven't got even to the beginning of that whole question, really. I mean, there's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. You try to tell other people, but you can't. And suffering happens. So it says something like, wars happen, people get old and die. You never let go of this thread, And it's just such an important part of our culture, is that it points, it not only is it that can bring good human values into being through our communities, and we can have, sensible ecological ways of living through communities, which is all good. But more crucially, it's about this movement from craving to Shraddha. The response of craving is always within us, always wanting more, until we've really cracked it. The conditioned world, we'll always be wanting, we'll always be hating, we'll always be basing our way of being on a kind of unawareness, a kind of lack of spiritual knowledge and depth. And yet also there's this countervailing trend, which is indicated in the path of a kind of burgeoning of faith, a kind of, not obviously in the sense of just mere belief, much more like intuition, much more like imagination, and an opening to something greater. And it's in the pujas, of course, that I found so painful. They were alluding to this thing that was missing from my whole schemata of the universe, which was not much of a schemata, actually. So time is moving on. So rather than say any more, I'll just say that those are the three things that I feel like, our culture, if we were to really offer the world and offer ourselves, would be a culture which encourages greater connection and greater understanding of nature, a culture that cherishes communities, that really look at, really uphold values, and that have this pointing towards the divine. That's it. Thank you.